In the early 1800s, when John C. Fremont came across northwest Kansas as part of the Lewis and Clark expedition, he stopped in Norton, and as he made his way across, he marked some places that he thought would be eventually good places for towns. One of those places was Oronoque. Before anything was done about Oronoque, and the country was made into counties, the city of Leota, which was about a mile and a half east of Oronoque, got in a big fight with Norton on who was going to get the county seat. And that was a big deal because if you had the county seat, you had more people coming, you could have more businesses come. And so the story goes that Leota and Norton were always, for several months in there, fought over who was going to get the county seat. At first, Norton was going to have it because they had the only wood frame building. Leota didn't like that, so one of Leota's people come to town, bought the building, had it moved to the Leota site. And wow, then Leota was the one that had the edge on being the county seat. Norton people didn't like it, so they went over to Leota and they stole all the paperwork that was in this building, which was going to be the courthouse. And they went back and forth several times until finally Norton was declared the county seat. Because of that, Leota got to be smaller, and but it was by Oronoque there. In 1885, the Lincoln Land Company bought the place where the town of Oronoque is from the state of Kansas, and they had a man called Anselmo Smith who platted out the town, drew it out, put in the ground the bur oak stakes. That bur oak doesn't rot in the ground where the different lots was at, and they started selling about 4 months later lots in the town. They sold for in August of 1885. They sold for $150. The town started blossoming once the railroad was there, or even prior to that. There was a bank, there was a lumber company, and that building is still partially standing. There was, of course, grocery stores. There was a grain elevator. There was an implement dealer. There was a cream station that was there. They had a hotel and a livery, and the hotel was well known for its good meals that it provided. And so when people were working on the railroad or working on building another town about a mile and a half away, Delville, they said the guys would walk to Oronoque to eat their lunch and then walk back. It had a drugstore. It had a post office. It was a very growing town until 1909. And in 1909, a big fire came through in October of that year and burnt down almost all the businesses in the business district. Not to be done out of anything, the businesses rebuilt. It actually had 3 destructive fires, but the town kept building and rebuilding. The main part of the town that Anselmo Smith plotted out is on the north side of the railroad, but on the south side of the railroad was where a lot of the houses was at. As the town grew smaller in the 1930s because of the dirty 30s, and people started moving out. And if you look at some of the old titles on these houses, people would buy a house or a piece of land, build a house, borrow money on it, pay off the bank, borrow money again, pay off the bank, not be able to pay off the bank or their taxes, and somebody would come in and pay for a plot of land for like $2.33 was one of the things I saw on some of our land titles for the town. as small towns shrunk and people left, with it went the businesses. And then in the early 1950s, when they decided, because of the flooding on the Prairie Dog, that they was going to build a dam and what would eventually be called the Keith Sebelius Lake, then they come in and they brought up land all around the area, including all of the houses in the south part of Oronoque, so that if the lake, they could push the lake all the way up to that land and where the railroad is built up. And so those houses were gone. At this point, what remains of the city of Oronoque is the lumber company, the basement and the high steps of the bank, the Christian church, because it had a large concrete basement. The church itself, which was started in 1905, was later torn down because one of the guys about 20 miles away, house had burned, and the Christian church was going out of business, and so they tore down the church and gave it to the man to build him a new home. But it took them so long to do it that by the time they got it torn down and taken to where the guy was going to rebuild, he had found lumber in an old building somewhere else and had his house already built. And so supposedly the wood from the church just laid out there in his yard and was never put to a good use. Also still remaining is the little red building that had housed the telephone company, and that was back when you called up the operator and told him who you wanted to talk to, and he plugged you in or unplugged you when you was finished. There's one broken down house that's 90% gone, and then the house that we live in was built in 1929 by a guy named Forrest Stout, and I'm not sure what he did for a living, but a lot of people come to see him because in the basement of his house he had a great big gigantic pool table. So Saturday night all the neighbors would come to his house to play pool. The house as it sits now, the front door faces the east, but as a child in the 1940s, a friend of mine spent a lot of time in that house because her best friend was about, the entry to the house was actually on the south side of the house. The only thing that's been built onto the house is a back porch, and the original house is still there with its woodwork and many updates to it.